following is a production of Cary TV, the Town of Cary's government access channel.
We are calling to order the Planning and Zoning meeting for April 22nd. We begin, as always, with adopting our agenda. Does anyone have any changes or amendments to the agenda? If not, I would look for a motion to adopt our agenda for this evening.
I'll make a motion to adopt tonight's agenda.
Do we have a
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Oh, and anyone opposed? Motion carries with multiple seconds. So they really like this agenda. The meetings for the March 25th meeting are next. Does anyone have any changes to those? If not, a motion to approve the meetings would, or the meeting minutes would be in order.
So moved. I'll second.
All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. That also is a unanimous approval. We move to our first case of the evening. I believe we have two cases to talk about tonight. Mr. Reiser to speak to us about 18 REZ 11 Roberts Road. Good evening.
Good evening, Board. This is a request to rezone 36.4 acres. It's located at Roberts Road and Page Road. The site's located off of Roberts Road between NC 540 and NC 55. Trelawney Lane is located to the south. Wood Forest Drive is located to the east, and Way Drive is to the north. The site is currently occupied by 4 dwelling units. This is a view of the site's frontage along Roberts Road. The street sign and gravel path in the middle are the intersection of Page Road with Roberts Road. The site is currently within Wake County's jurisdiction. It's zoned residential 40 watershed. And the applicant has proposed annexation by the town of Cary. The annexation would be a non-contiguous or satellite annexation. The town may annex the site because we have an annexation agreement with the town of Apex that runs down Roberts Road. The applicant is proposing that the site, once annexed, be zoned to transitional residential conditional use with a watershed protection overlay district. According to the town of Cary's GIS maps, there appear to be 2 stream buffers that impact the site, one along the eastern property line and one closer to the western property line bisecting the site. The applicant is offering multiple zoning conditions related to the proposal. First, the uses that are proposed are limited to townhouses and neighborhood recreation. The applicant has proposed a maximum density of 3.5 dwelling units per acre, or a maximum of 127 units on the site. There would be approximately 15 acres of open space, or 650,000 square feet of open space. The applicant is proposing 15,000 square feet of community gathering space, which is 3 times the required amount for a site of this size. And a minimum perimeter buffer of 50 feet, which is larger than the LDO requirement of 40 feet for a perimeter buffer. The applicant has submitted a concept plan to show how the rezoning will provide open space. This graphic illustrates several elements. I will go through those individually. As shown here, the site has required stream buffers and required streetscape and perimeter buffers. These constitute approximately a third of the site. The areas that are shown here with the hatching are proposed to be preserved. Additional managed open space areas, which are shown here in solid green, are also proposed. These areas may be cleared and graded and landscaped. They may not include building structures, but they may include stormwater control measures. Together, the required buffer areas and additional managed open space constitute about 40% of the site. There's one other element represented by the plan. A central community gathering space is also proposed. This area includes a required 5,000 square feet, which is represented by the green hatched area in the middle, and 10,000 square feet of additional community gathering space for a total of 15,000 square feet for the community gathering space. A variety of conditions are proposed regarding the appearance of the proposed townhomes, including conditions which regulate the length of the buildings, the spacing of the garages, the placement of the windows, the mix of the facade materials, and the roof treatments. And since the Town Council public hearing, the applicant has offered a condition for public streets. Staff has reviewed the proposal with the Imagine Cary Community Plan and has observed that the proposal seems to have the greatest potential connection to policies in the Imagine Cary Community Plan's Live, Shape, and Move chapters. The site is located in the traditional neighborhood category, which predominantly consists of single-family detached dwellings. Traditional neighborhoods often do include moderate amounts of other housing types, such as patio homes, townhomes, and multifamily housing, but these tend to be sited in discrete pods. This proposed use may be consistent if the board finds that this site qualifies as such a pod for denser development. Transitions between uses are also considered when townhomes are sited with nearby detached dwellings. The applicant has proposed conditions in an effort to comply with this policy. This is an appropriate time to also note that Apex's land use plan map calls for medium to high density residential on the south side of Roberts Road. And regarding the policy for providing for more housing options, the town of Apex did approve a rezoning in its jurisdiction across the street last year in August of 2018 that allows for a mix of detached dwellings and townhomes with an overall density of 4.7 dwelling units per acre. That recent approved rezoning is shown here with the star location. When looking at the Live chapter of the Imagine Cary Community Plan, we note that the Harmony subdivision and the Turner Creek Elementary School to the north, and the medium density south of Roberts Road and Apex's jurisdiction, together, this proposal could potentially be viewed as providing more housing choices by adding townhouses to the mix of housing in the area, which currently consists of detached residential. Transit service is not available along Jenks Road or Roberts Road, although there is a Go Triangle transit service along NC 55. The town's planned roadway widths map calls for a future northbound Collector Avenue to be constructed through a portion of the site. This road is intended to ultimately connect Roberts Road to Turner Creek Road to the north. The site will have access to sewer through a future sewer extension project called the Jack Branch Sewer Extension Project, which will provide a sewer north of the site just east of NC 540, bringing it under 540 just to the east. The site will have to extend sewer approximately 2,000 feet to the north across multiple parcels to connect to the Jack Branch Sewer Extension Project. There was a neighborhood meeting on June 11th, 2018, and a town council public hearing on September 27th of 2018. There were concerns and feedback expressed at both of these meetings and the public hearing regarding the proposed land use of townhomes, the number of units, the density proposed, side access, connectivity, and traffic, water and sewer services, and potential impact to nearby well and septic systems. And due to concerns regarding connectivity, council requested a clarification of how the town's connectivity requirements may apply to the site. Connectivity is addressed in Chapter 7 of the Land Development Ordinance. These requirements are intended to support the creation of a highly connected transportation system to provide choices for drivers, bicyclists, and pedestrians. Staff has completed an analysis and finds that 2 ordinance requirements for connectivity apply. First, connectivity between a site and adjoining properties. The second is a requirement for access to 2 public streets for any development with more than 100 residential units. If the rezoning is approved, the connectivity requirements of the ordinance would not be enforced until a development plan is submitted. Staff has also analyzed the status of Wood Forest Drive, which is an existing road that stubs to the eastern property line of the subject site, which is shown here in yellow. The property boundary for the subject site extends to the existing edge of pavement for Wood Forest Drive, and the road was clearly designed and constructed for a connection at some point in the future. The plat that subdivided the parcels along Wood Forest Drive offers a road for dedication to the public. However, NCDOT has not accepted the road for maintenance, and the road remains privately maintained. Staff's preliminary analysis finds the applicable policies from the Imagine Cary Community Plan come from the Live, Shape, and Move chapters. The site is within the traditional neighborhood of the Future Growth Framework map. The traditional neighborhood category lists townhouses as a predominant land use and states that townhouses should be developed within pods. Pods are not defined in the Imagine Cary Community Plan, so this is a case where the board tonight can use your judgment as to whether this case meets that criteria. The applicant has proposed increased transitions through wider buffers and increased community gathering space. They have also submitted a concept plan to commit to locations of these buffers, and staff notes that the community gathering space that's proposed is 3 times the LDO requirements. And because the applicants have submitted a concept plan, we know that it will be truly centrally located within the site. Lastly, it appears that there will be challenges to meeting the town's connectivity requirements. However, the review and determination of connectivity will officially occur at the time of development plan. The staff has completed a preliminary analysis of the ordinance and the applicability and has shared some of this preliminary feedback with the applicant. The applicant will be required to meet the requirements of the ordinance at the time of development plan review, or go through the proper channels to request a waiver or modification. And so overall, staff's preliminary analysis finds that there are policies that are supportive, as well as policies that are not supportive of this rezoning request. In general, staff finds that the case is generally consistent with the Cary Community Plan. However, this is up for interpretation. So some of the questions that the board can use in their consideration tonight, these are also questions that staff looked at when staff was preparing its analysis, was is this use that's proposed, the use of townhomes, appropriate at this location? Another question to consider is the density, 3.5 dwelling units per acre, appropriate at this location? Does the proposal meet the intent of a pod as described in the traditional neighborhood designation? Now, as I noted, a pod's not defined in the Imagine Cary Community Plan, so this is an area that's up for interpretation. And are the transitions proposed through the concept plan and the increased buffer widths appropriate? So this concludes staff's presentation. The applicant is here to share comments. Following that, staff's available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the Planning Board. Glenda Top with Glenda S. Top and Associates. What I'd like to do tonight is go through how the proposed rezoning, which policies that are applicable, and hopefully address some of the issues that staff just went over for y'all to consider. On the Future Growth Framework map, the designation is a traditional neighborhood, and this does allow for a moderate amount of residential uses, differing housing types. Under predominant land use, townhomes is listed, which is the use we're proposing. It does discuss that these differing housing types should be located in pods. As it's stated in your staff report, there's not a clear definition of a pod. However, we do feel very strongly that we meet a definition for a pod as we see it. The size of the tract is 36 acres. The density really is modest. It's 3.5 units per acre. Low density is up to 3. We have provided 650,000 square feet of open space. If you look at the concept plan, you can see that the site is affected by stream buffers, which further enhances the site in terms of being transitioning and being hidden and not having a negative impact on the surrounding uses. The community gathering space has been increased to 15,000 feet, and the perimeter buffers that are required are 40 feet. We've provided 50. We do believe that transitional residential, which allows townhomes, is appropriate at this location. When it discusses in the Cary Community Plan about providing pockets of differing land uses, the examples it gives are developments like Lockmere, developments like Preston. Those were developments many years ago where you could establish, 500 to 1,000 acres, and it was easy to plan within that development. There'd be townhomes here, there'd be single family here, there could be apartments here. In other areas that have seen development, what has been envisioned is that those pockets will be located in the most appropriate locations because that amount of acreage does not exist. What we've done here is we've picked out a site that we believe would be appropriate for townhomes, whether it was, somebody, was able to acquire a much larger piece of property to develop multiple uses. We feel that townhomes located here has minimal impact in the area and does provide an additional housing type that's not there now. The predominant housing type is single-family detached on pretty large lots. So this does provide an opportunity for that, which goes back to the LIVE chapter for providing more housing choices for all residents in Cary. The staff report talks about proximity to services. Yes, there's not non-residential development right adjacent to this property, but using Jinx and Highway 55 as an example, that's less than a mile or so from this site, so there is services located in a convenient location. This is an area that has developed some, but it's going to develop more when sewer is available. So it's going to be important that additional housing options are there. Also, in terms of infill, in some ways one can look at this as an infill site because development would probably have already occurred in a lot of these areas where we are if sewer was available, which is what we're waiting on. Also, as staff pointed out, in Apex, their land use plan for across the street has designated the area for medium to high density. Lastly, looking at Chapter 6, appropriate transitions, this is one that we feel that we very strongly comply with. We have the buffer, the perimeter, that's 40, we're doing 50 feet. We are offering 650,000 square feet of open space. We have tripled the community gathering space. We have limited the townhomes to 4, 5, and 6 unit buildings. Also, it's important to note that the transition will further be smooth as the proposed townhome development will be of similar height and number of stories as the existing single-family development. So this addresses the scale of development. And lastly, I do want to point out Policy 8 about preserve and maintain Cary's attractive appearance and quality of development. As we all know, for certain types of developments now, you can't necessarily guarantee what a development might look like. So we have offered zoning conditions that address architectural conditions for the development. Want to touch just briefly on connectivity. We are willing to connect to the public right-of-way of Wood Forest Drive to satisfy the 2 public street requirement, but since the road is currently being maintained privately by the homeowners, we have asked staff to consider allowing the connection to be emergency only in order to respect the wishes of the residents who live there. However, we do hear what staff wrote in their staff report, but we did want to just read that into the record. In conclusion, if one looks at whether or not this proposal complies with the Cary Community Plan, in our minds, it very clearly does. The role of the board is to determine if it is in compliance. We hope you'll agree, and we ask for your support. And I'm here to answer questions, as are other members of the team. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome to stay right there with us if you like. Let me start on this side if anyone has questions for the staff or the applicant.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, this connectivity issue, I'd like some more clarification with that. I understand you need to have 2 public roads as a part of what will connect this to the broader environment, but sounds like we're short 1 at least.
Yeah, that's correct. The ordinance requires when you have 100 or more units for residential development that there be connections to 2 public access points, 2 public roads. And as we noted in the presentation and the staff report, there appears to be some challenges with that. So the review of the connectivity ordinance would, officially take place at the time of the development plan review, but given the obvious challenges that we see, that's why we wanted to go ahead and connect a preliminary analysis. So the applicant, their option would be to build less than 100 homes, given the site constraints that they have now. They could seek a waiver to that requirement through the quasi-judicial process. That would be a separate process that they would have to go through during the development plan process if they would like to seek relief from that requirement.
And there were a couple of references to a concept plan, and maybe my idea of a concept plan is different than what was presented, but I didn't see anything that kind of gave the perspective of where this thing fits within the tract.
So the applicants have submitted a concept plan for the purposes of illustrating open space.
I see.
So this concept plan does not show the location of the townhome units or the circulation, for the site, but it does show where the required open space is and where the additional open space that they're proposing would be. So it is a concept plan, but limited to showing open space.
I understand. And then, I don't think this is a part of our consideration, but I'm just curious from my own information. The sewer connection appears to be, you said what, about 2,000 feet?
Yes.
Is that reasonable in terms of how far somebody has to connect a development to a public sewer?
Well, I believe that ultimate determination would have to be up to the applicant and whether it works for what they're proposing. But as you can see, this is the approximate location of the sewer extension project, and they would need to secure easements 2,000 feet to the north to connect to that sewer extension project. And if that is, as far as whether or not that's feasible, the applicant could probably speak to that further.
Okay.
If I may add, the people that are looking at developing the property have had extensive conversations with the town, and they understand the sewer and what will be required for connection. So they are aware of what's going on, and basically this process they didn't start right away because they also know the sewer was not going to be readily available, but they are aware of what will be involved and the cost associated with it.
Okay, that's all I have for now.
Okay.
I had a similar question about the access. I was concerned about what rights do these property owners have, the applicant, to cross over that existing road? What is the name of it?
To Wood Forest?
The privately maintained road.
Let me pull up a slide to that. So what staff has found through research is Wood Forest Drive has, when these properties were originally subdivided through a plat, Wood Forest Drive was shown on that plat as public right-of-way, and it was offered for dedication to the state. However, it was never accepted into the state's maintenance program, so it's not maintained by the state. The homeowners are privately maintaining the road, and the right-of-way remains in almost a state of limbo. It's been offered for dedication but never accepted by the state. So as far as connecting, if the applicant were to connect to Wood Forest Drive, in its current state, it wouldn't satisfy that criteria for connecting to a public street as that second point of access. Now, at some point in the future, Wood Forest Drive could be, turned over to the state maintenance program because, again, the right-of-way was offered for dedication. It just has not been accepted by the state.
Could those property owners refuse to allow anybody to use that until the state accepts it for maintenance?
I believe that they could.
How does the quasi-judicial process work if they come in and ask for an exception?
So that would occur during the development plan review process. So again, there are two sections of the connectivity ordinance that would apply to the site. One of those would require that if they're proposing more than 100 units, that they have that second access to a public street. And the applicant would submit a development plan. And if they choose to request an emergency-only access or to not have that full access to Wood Forest Drive, then they would go through the quasi-judicial process, which would go before the town council, as the way the ordinance is currently written.
Okay.
Right?
Good evening, Mr. Cary. You mentioned in the staff report and some of the discussion around sewer availability in the area. The current water, does the town currently supply water to that area?
I don't believe so. Much of this area is outside of the town's ETJ and the town's current limits.
Would the applicant be required to tie into water, or is that something they would be required? Okay. My other question is, you mentioned in the presentation about this being a non-contiguous annexation, I believe is what you referred to it as.
Yes.
Are there any concerns from the staff, mainly from a safety standpoint, about having an area that's not contiguous? And are there agreements with Apex and the county for something like emergency services? For example, if there's a fire in a home here, would that be the responsibility of Cary to drive through another jurisdiction to address, or how would that work?
One of the requirements when an annexation petition is submitted is that it go through what's called the sufficiency process. And when we've got a case like this where it's a non-contiguous annexation, you can see much of the area around this property is white, which means it's outside of the town of Cary's jurisdiction, within Wake County's jurisdiction. We take the annexation through the sufficiency process, where we route the annexation request to all the town departments to determine if there's any concerns with providing town services. And in this case, there were no concerns that were raised, and it did go through the sufficiency process.
Okay, that's good to hear. I appreciate that.
Brian, I'm sorry, can I interrupt 1 second?
Sure.
To add to what you were saying real quick. So where I live, I'm not in Apex or Cary, but I'm surrounded by Cary. And we had an issue out there, and I was passed through Apex, Cary, and then finally given to the state. So if it was a dire emergency, there would have been a big problem.
But that's good
So-
to know. And that's kind of where my concern was coming from, is you have an area that's not contiguous, and
Right.
you have jurisdictions that might not
Yeah.
necessarily know that.
Personal
it's in there.
experience, you get
So,
passed until somebody will finally take it.
something to know and consider.
Is that it? Anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Two things. Back to Wood Forest Drive again. I'm not an attorney, but I know one. But theoretically, I just want to make sure I understand this clearly. The folks on that road, if they felt like it, they could put a big gate up there and put a padlock on it or something and just deny access.
That's correct.
And if they did that, then to me, you certainly wouldn't be meeting the criteria to have 2 access points unless there's another access point that I don't see on here.
I will note that the town's ordinance requires 2 access points to public streets. So even if the applicant were to build a road and the road doesn't connect to Wood Forest Drive, that would not meet the criteria because right now Wood Forest Drive is not a public street.
Okay, so really, as things stand here right this minute, realizing there could be things happen later, as you said in review, that's really not meeting our criteria for 2 access points. Okay. Next question is on pod. I tried to look in my massive plan, and I couldn't really find anything about a pod in there other than the reference to it. So did I miss anything?
No, you did not.
I just want to be sure.
The term pod is used to describe what would be an allowable use for townhomes within the traditional neighborhood designation. I think the interpretation of the size and the transitions that are proposed can be looked at on a case-by-case basis, and that is where discretion can be applied in interpretation.
It's kind of like and we've dealt with this before, it's kind of like the term rural, right? You know, that's in there as well, and we've debated that term before. So pod, I know what my definition of pod is. It may not be these folks' definition, but pod to me is small, not big.
You want a legal definition?
I'd love that. Are you? But I think I have to look over here, and they don't let me look at you. That's it.
Oh, I thought you were still
Nope.
asking for definition.
Sure.
say something?
But yeah.
And you would like for me to put up
Yep,
the concept
because,
plan?
yeah, I won't be able to find it. And I do understand, you know, in reading through staff report, that pod was not defined. And I'm sure everybody in this whole place would come up with a different definition. For me, and for the years that I've been a planner, both in the public and private sector, to me, size may be important, but I think it's also how the site fits within the context of the whole area. And here you have an example with this concept plan that points out the stream buffers, the areas of additional open space. You begin to see, just because of how this is laid out, is that there's really only 2 areas where you can locate your townhomes. They are very well screened. In every instance, we exceed what the code requires for buffers, and as we pointed out, how much open space we have. To me, I see this as I'm going to use another term that probably means several things to different people in terms of clustering development. This to me is particularly because of the stream buffers that just happen to be here, it really lends itself to a situation where it may be 36 acres, but that location in terms of where the townhomes can be is small, and of course you've got a larger area there, but you're surrounded by stream buffer, and we've provided that community gathering area. If you look at the definition of a pod, and again, not wanting to necessarily use that word, I see this as being an ideal site to have another use in an area that right now on this side of the road is primarily large lot, single family. To me, this allows for those uses to be sensitively placed, and they have conditions attached to it architecturally that will blend in with the area. Again, the height of townhomes is typically the height of a single-family home. They have limited the massing of the buildings to minimize the impact. So to me, there are other things besides size that go into the definition of a pod. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. That's good.
Okay, moving right along.
Mr. Rye, question, you mentioned it earlier, and help me out because I didn't remember everything. This area, this general area where you have up, I guess north, kind of the right side of Roberts Road, is that Cary's area for annexation? Is it, and then to the other side of the left side, if you will, that's Apex. That's kind of the dividing line. It goes down to Jenks. So eventually, everything Roberts Road, Jenks Road, kind of north of all that is going to be eventually Cary one day.
That's right.
Okay.
And you could even see
If
on
it
this
isn't
map
already, but I
that
mean-
the shading in blue will eventually be APEX.
And part of this is, I'm anticipating 10 years from now, if not, what this is going to be, and it's not going to be large lot, single family. A couple of questions is, so the applicants come before us with wanting a zoning change on a piece of land that doesn't have access to sewer or water or meet the road at this point in time. Got it. Jack Branch Extension, is that a project that's undergoing already, and is that a Town of Cary project? The sewer extension?
Yeah, it has started as a Town of Cary project where the Town of Cary was looking into the design and would ultimately be a public project.
Okay, so it's in the design phase, but it's on the plans for capital expenditure, and eventually that's part of the long-range plan. Okay, so that will be creating that sewer connection underneath 540 to the other side to all these lots. I get, all right, thank you. You mentioned there was a condition for a new street that was added. Can you clarify that? A little more information on what that is?
The applicants have proposed that all streets built within the neighborhood or this development be built to Town of Cary standards for public streets and be dedicated to the public. So they would ultimately be maintained by the Town of Cary as opposed to being privately maintained by the residents within the neighborhood.
Okay. So basically what they're proposing then, or could be proposing, I'm not sure they have it, is that from Roberts Road, there'll be an access road, they'll be coming to where most of the units are going to be built, and that would be then potentially a road that could be turned over to the town as a town road, the town access road.
Yeah, there are a fair number of townhome neighborhoods within the Town of Cary that are privately maintained for townhomes. And this has been an area that has caused some concern among townhome residents. So in this case, the applicants have offered to build public streets where the Town of Cary would maintain the road.
Okay.
I'd also like to just, if you don't mind, just point
Sure.
out just a clarification along the utilities. There is an existing water line along Roberts Road, so they would be able to connect to water currently available along Roberts Road.
Okay, so that's a Town of Cary utility?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so there is earth, so there is water, okay, so there is town water,
Yes,
okay.
just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. One last question, I guess, is on, regarding the privately maintained road, whatever, I forget the name of it, I'm sorry.
Wood Forest Drive?
Yes. Has that not been turned over to the state because it didn't meet the state standards? Or, I'm just curious.
I don't believe we are aware of that, the reasoning as to why it was never accepted by the state maintenance system. Sounds like the applicant be able to speak to that, so I'll turn it over to the applicant.
All right, just curious.
My name is Glenn Phillips. I'm with Toll Brothers, but I head up their engineering, surveying, and planning arm here in North Carolina. We did some extensive research on this road before we got involved with the property, and then during this whole process. Unfortunately, our attorney, Jason Barron, couldn't be here tonight, or else I think he could give you kind of a legal perspective on this road. But I'll do the best I can, because from a surveyor's perspective, we come across this a lot. Wood Forest Drive, the subdivision itself was approved with that road being a public right-of-way, and the expectation of Wake County, and in fact the condition on the plat, when the right-of-way was recorded, required that developer to file a petition with DOT for DOT to take the road over for maintenance. That's common practice because back then, you would build the road to DOT standards. DOT would sign the plat saying that it was built to their standards, but DOT doesn't take a road over for maintenance until there's at least 4 property owners on the road. So generally, the developer petitions DOT once they reach that point, and then DOT takes over that road for maintenance. In this case, the developer recorded the plat as public right-of-way, just like you see on this exhibit here, but in fact, that public right-of-way actually goes all the way to Highway 55. So that was recorded as public right-of-way. But the developer never petitioned DOT to take that right-of-way over for maintenance. And then, over a period of time, as he sold to these property owners in that subdivision, they did not want to petition DOT to take over that road for maintenance. So what you have is you have a public right-of-way with a road that is currently being privately maintained. So our thought process in this was to meet the connectivity requirement, we would make the physical connection to that public right-of-way. But we would not, since that is a privately maintained road, we recommended to staff that that access be limited to an emergency access only until such time as that road becomes publicly maintained. We thought that would be a logical way to give Cary what they wanted in the way of a physical connection to a public right-of-way, even though the road itself is privately maintained, knowing that sometime down the road that would change, either when that area is redeveloped or the petition is filed. So I hope that
helps.
shed some light on it.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Sure.
I want to add to that because I don't believe that's correct. It is not a public right-of-way. There's case law on this. I'm happy to share if anybody's interested, Mr. Montgomery. But it is not a public right-of-way. Just making the offer for dedication does not make it a public right-of-way. And since it's never been accepted by DOT, it is essentially just a private street.
Thank you.
Does any of that right-of-way go on to this site, the dedicated or the original plat that was approved by the county? Does any of that go on to your site?
It actually terminates at the yellow line.
Okay, so you can't petition DOT because it doesn't come onto your site?
Well, we have frontage. We actually butt up against that right-of-way. So that finger, that yellow finger that comes down and connects to Wood Forest, we do have a physical connection to that right-of-way.
I have just one last, so, Katie, if this zoning was to go through, it still needs to go to site plan. And at that point, at site plan, it would have to meet all the conditions, I mean, sewer connections, whatever, whether they want to do 100 plus or 99. And so tonight it's looking at the conditions on the land, and then that's a whole nother step to go to the next step.
That's exactly correct. So what we're looking at tonight is a preliminary analysis of what staff would be looking at the time of development plan review. Typically, this would not be looked at until the development plan review, but because it's an obvious challenge that we've noted and the applicants noted, we wanted to share the preliminary analysis tonight because it will be potentially a challenge as they go into the development plan review. But there are processes and requirements for that to be looked at during that time.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I don't have any other questions.
Okay. Sure.
I have a few. I understand this is currently an Apex jurisdiction, and they're applying for annexation. My concern is the location.
Really quick, this
Sure.
is within Wake County's jurisdiction.
Wake County, okay, so they're applying for annexation.
That's correct.
Okay, good. So my concern is the location and proximity to the green level spa, and I was wondering if staff's taking that into consideration when reviewing the proposal.
It's technically, you're right, it is close to the green level special planning area, but because it's located outside of the special planning area, we are evaluating it under the criteria for the traditional neighborhood designation on the future growth framework map.
So is it considered not green level special planning area because it's under Wake jurisdiction now? No?
No, it's outside of the boundaries.
Okay. So even though it's, I just wanted to make a comment that there's high-density housing approved and being built in 3 different locations off of Jinks Road, both close to 64 and 540. And when I first looked at this, I thought, well, yeah, it makes sense because I see 540 right there, but then I remembered there's not an entrance or exit to 540 located there. And then a pod of high-density housing. I think that we've called them pockets too. As a matter of fact, Ms. Hawk actually represented an applicant which already has a pod or pocket in the area located within 2 miles. And as I just said, there's other high density in that area that's built by Apex and by Cary. My other concern is Woodforest Drive being a privately maintained road. As I expressed when Ryan was speaking a few minutes ago, I have concern about the emergency services efficiently getting to the folks that are having an emergency because I have personally experienced that being located where I am. The secondary thing is I live off a privately maintained road, and the applicant that was approved to build off of Ridgeback Road was supposed to be not permitted to use it for construction use, which I'm sure that is a concern by the people that came to that town meeting. And also, they were supposed to maintain it and put fresh gravel down. That's a private agreement that was never enforced. It's not enforceable by the town of Cary. And so these folks off that road are kind of out of luck. So I would hate to see that happen to these people. I think that's pretty much all I have.
Okay, I just have a question or two about the road as well, and then I think that'll do it for me. So I understand with neighborhoods that put these rumble strips or speed bumps in, they're very limited to how they can do it because the ambulances and fire trucks are quite sensitive to that sort of thing. So if we've got a road that's going to be used for emergency services that's privately maintained, and a bunch of potholes or a bunch of big rain washouts happen, and they just say, I can't afford to maintain that, what happens? Is there an assessment done of it? If it's used for emergency purposes, will there be an assessment done periodically that says this road is okay for these emergency vehicles?
That may be something that would be looked at during the quasi-judicial process. I'm going to. And yeah, that would be, that would be covered during that portion, and that actually has not been analyzed during the rezoning process yet.
The other question I have is for the legitimate road, if we want to call it that, that's going to go into this property coming off of Roberts, that's going to go over the stream buffer, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so they'll have to build all the appropriate stuff there. So if you're going over a stream and the weather goes sideways, there's always that possibility that the emergency road may actually be used. That's all I had. Anyone else have any other questions before we have a motion and a discussion? If there's no other questions, thank you. If it's about my question, yeah.
Yes, in terms of, I just wanted to clarify, as staff was pointing out, the road part, we understand, and staff did a good job explaining what the issues are. So we know, or the applicant knows, that there are certain obstacles that they will have to potentially address when they go through the site plan process. And that's why there were meetings between us and the town staff to understand it, and why it was put in the staff report, just to make everyone aware. So there is an understanding that certain things may have to happen. And as far as construction traffic and those types of things, those issues were not discussed at the neighborhood meeting because that was not, there was no concern about the construction traffic. It was really about the second point of access and not going through their neighborhood. And the only other thing that I do want to clarify is the area that we're looking at many years ago was part of an Apex Cary interlocal agreement because the town of Cary did not want to go or did not go through the ETJ process. So this was the first agreement that was made in order to very clearly define the boundaries between Apex and Cary. Everything north was going to be sewered by Cary with water and sewer, in the other direction Apex. The intent was for it to develop in Cary. That's why it's part of the Cary Community Plan, and it's not in the ETJ, but it is being planned for. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands that this is not an area that hasn't been thought of, and that can be seen in that sewer extension. That is a town project because the intent was for this area to open up.
Great, thanks for straightening that out. So does anyone else have any other questions or a motion?
I mean, I would make a motion, but I don't know that everybody is going to want to get behind me on it. I can tell you that right now.
That's the whole reason why we do what we do.
Well, then I'll do it. I move that the board find case number 18-REZ-11 is not consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans for the reasons set forth in the staff report, presentation, and discussion by the Planning and Zoning Board.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, why don't you lead us off?
I really struggle with this, and I really try to look at the big picture, rarely go this route, but to me, I'm hung up on two things, and it's not my place, you know, I'm offering a citizen's perspective and nothing but to say, you know, maybe this should have waited. I think there's opportunity between today and whenever the town council gets this, where maybe some of this could be sorted out, but right now, I can't get past Wood Forest Drive. To me, this does not meet the Cary plan because there aren't two connection points. Maybe there would be in the future, but I'm only going by what I know here today. And 127 units doesn't meet my personal definition of a pod. Even for an infill like this, I do recognize that this is a difficult piece of land, and I have a lot of empathy for that. And I think that for the homeowners, it's, you know, there's going to be townhomes all around this area. There may be townhomes here one day, but just based on what I have looking at here today, I just don't see that it's a pod, my definition, and I'm hung up on that doesn't meet the criteria to have connection roads.
Okay.
I feel the same. I feel like on this project, we're kicking a lot of things down the pipe and just let the next guy kind of deal with it from the road. And then the area kind of bothers me because even though it's not technically considered the green level spa area, it is so close and we're building so much in that area. This is close to a high school. I know this area. This is my area. So I just have, I think that this isn't a pod or a pocket or anything like that. This needs to be looked at a little bit closer.
Okay. Anyone else like to say anything? Seems like you do.
Sure, I'll jump in. I'm going to, I guess, vote in support of finding this not consistent, but I guess I kind of do disagree with some of what's been said. The connectivity, to me, I personally feel like that's something that really staff is responsible for. I think the LDO really strongly stipulates that that's a site plan or a development plan review type activity. So for purposes of the rezoning, at least from my perspective, I really don't see any issue with that. Knowing that I have faith that the staff is obviously going to do their job and evaluate it per the LDO. The two areas of concern for me are first, and one thing Ms. Dry alluded to in her staff report, policy 4 of the LIVE chapter, which discusses the different types of housing choices and their proximity to mixed-use centers. And this is actually something that I kind of struggle with a lot within this area. We're seeing a lot of townhome developments, and I don't really feel like that policy, it's difficult to evaluate how close something is to amenities or how close something is to a mixed-use center. And I feel like that's very subjective, and it's one thing that I kind of struggle with. Specifically to this case, there really isn't much in the way of amenities. There's not a transit stop. I kind of am really back and forth on how that policy is applied to this area. But the one thing that I'm really stuck up on is this idea of the pods in the traditional neighborhood. For me, I actually agree completely with the applicant says about the stream buffers. I do think that those stream buffers offer the semblance of a pod. I think that the idea of a pod is to put these differing housing choices in an area that aren't directly out in the open, that kind of aren't out there right in front of you. And I think that the stream buffers do offer somewhat of a protection. Where I think that the applicant is lacking is in the western area of the property. They're also proposing to put townhomes and pretty much making the site an entirely townhome development. To the west of that western stream buffer, were that not a townhome development, I would completely agree that this is within the definition of the comprehensive plan as a pod. But as it stands now, what we see before us, I would say no, it doesn't meet that criteria. And that's something, at least in this development, that really is weighed heavily on me. So that's pretty much what's leaning me towards finding this not consistent.
Would anyone else like to say anything?
Yeah.
Yes.
I share some of those same concerns. I don't know how to define a pod either, but from the context that in the staff report, I sort of inferred that it would be more realistic to have, say, a larger group of some other type of density housing, like maybe some smaller single family and then some little clumps of townhomes, so that there'd be a mixture within this particular tract to give you the sense of what these different housing styles would be. But that may be just my own interpretation of it. But 120 some is sort of dense, and that was one of the questions we were asked to maybe consider: is the density appropriate here? Yes, there's going to be a lot of intense development across the street, but right next to the Cary side is all single family. So it is questionable whether or not that's an effective transition in my mind. And then the connectivity thing with the road, I know that, again, that's not our decision to make because there's a lot more review that has to happen, but it's a big concern when you've got nothing but a private road to go with and not knowing what the future's going to be. So those two things make it, and plus, I think to your point, Mark, just the idea that this is sitting out here as an island in the middle of a lot of unincorporated area and sort of on its own in terms of access to emergency services is a big concern, especially when you're talking about a very high-density type of development. So,
Chuck, did you have something with?
Can anybody play the William Tell Overture? I'm the Lone Ranger here. I would vote in favor of this, and I do think it meets the pod concept, which is really interesting since none of us can define pod.
we have our own different.
You know, it's like the Supreme Court just said, you know, pornography's in the eye of the beholder. I think it is. I live in Lockmere, and we have a lot of mixed uses, have zero lot line homes and townhomes within a mile of my house, and it all functions very well. So I don't have a problem with the concept of the pod. I have had a lot of problems with the access question, but then I decided it was above my pay grade. that town council gets 2 bites at the apple on deciding about the access question. They get a bite on the zoning vote, and it also can go before them on quasi-judicial. And so I would punt that to the council and let them deal with that particular issue. So I will vote against the motion, and I would vote in favor of a motion to approve if it were on the table, which it's not going to be.
I think I want to round the whole group out, and you got anything you want to add to this? I'd like to know where you're going.
Well, yeah, where I'm probably going to go is I won't let Chuck be the Lone Ranger. And I have a lot of angst over a number of things, but what I see is going back that the applicants come before us, ask for zoning on a particular piece of land. There's lots of constraints as to, and barriers and challenges they have to go before they're ever going to get to a site permit, a site plan, a permanent site plan. And it's like everybody else, I look at the pod and it's like, yeah, 100, you know, whatever the number is going to be, 100, 120 units, but, you know, it's looking at the density, it's going to be, is going to be screening because it's going to be set back. So in my mind, it's like, I can deal with that. And I also am kind of looking at, I know we're not supposed to speculate, but I will speculate here because I'm looking at the bigger area. You know, the town is not going to be doing a sewer line extension underneath 540, just, you know, just because we don't have anything else to do with the funds. The applicant is a robust developer out there, whoever the developer is, but as you look on the other side where the high school is, south of the high school, and you know, I don't know whether we'll have the luxury of a, you know, back in the day of a PUD or something where somebody's going to come in, oh, here's this piece of land, whatever it is, 500 acres out there, and here's what we're going to do. It's going to come to us piecemeal. And, you know, we're going to see 40 acres here and 50 acres there. The onus is going to be on the staff to say, you know, here's how this mosaic's coming together. And we're seeing it as we see in some other developments before us, you know, the last guy in, that last, whatever be 25 acres, they get restricted by whatever everybody else did. So if I'm putting my stake in the ground for the townhomes, you know that somebody else is going to have to come in with some, you know, R12 zoned or, you know, or whatever in the single family side. You know, I'm looking at some of the density, and I don't know whether, you know, this is the battle versus the war. And again, against, I think as Chuck said, that's for some other pay grades. You know, we wish that we could have some compatibility with what our neighbors to the south, Apex, is doing, but we don't always have that the luxury. We've already experienced that in other parts of the western part where, you know, there's not always in the same mind. So long story is I would probably, you know, I'd be with Chuck. I'd probably support it knowing that it's got a long way to go, that this is just one piece in the puzzle and to get things started.
From what I've heard, it sounds like there's 4 people who will vote to find this non-inconsistent, and 2, and I'll add my name to them to be 3, that would not support the motion of inconsistency. And my reasoning, first let me talk about townhomes and density. Density is always kind of a sort of a squishy target because we have to build all that open space into the calculation, and you can say that your density is so much lower, but really in certain spots you swing your arm around, you're going to hit a lot of density. But I look at pods or clusters or whatever, the way some artists look at sculptures, or a friend of mine who's a golf course architect look at golf holes. You don't create one out of a rock or out of the land. It's already there. You're just bringing it out. It just builds. And with the reason I say that is this pod kind of just falls in with all the constraints that are in there, with the buffers and the streams and things like that. If you really wanted to just slam something in there, you could, but sometimes you just have to work with what you got, and I think that fits. Now, that said, rather than talk about pods, let me talk about townhomes, because we end up with this sort of a perpetual motion machine of sorts. It's very easy to say, does this density fit in the overall area, including that area in light blue, which is Apex, which, you know, when the microphones are off, you hear a lot of people saying, oh, wow, they're just putting townhomes everywhere. Well, if that's the case, then this fits, because it's townhomes, and there's townhomes all over the place. But if we say okay to this, then it's just another set of townhomes, and then when the next one comes in with townhomes, you go, well, there's a whole bunch of townhomes around, so it's not, it kind of fits. And like Dan was saying, you know, we got to look at the last guy in to say, you make the compensation and you provide the mix, which is anything but townhomes. So it's totally fair to look at this thing holistically and see where these townhomes fit. That's what the Cary Community Plan, and that's what our charge is to do. So I don't find that out of bounds at all, is to look in the large scheme of things. But at the same time, if you look at it micro, the pod thing kind of works. Now, maybe there could be a few less townhomes, sure, but it kind of works into the terrain that's put before it. I agree with what several of my colleagues have said here. The road thing is definitely something that will be hashed out. I have never in my time on this board ever seen a single thing come up that has caught the staff by surprise. They always have this stuff figured out long before it gets to us, or at least they have all the issues identified. I am totally comfortable that the road falls into that category. And on the density issues, I think we're consistent with the overall plan on balance. But from the sounds of things, that's not going to be enough. Does anyone have anything else to say? If not, all those in favor of finding this inconsistent with the Cary Community Plan, please say aye and raise your hand too.
Aye.
We've got 4. All those opposed to this motion say no and raise your hand as well. No. The motion passes 4-3. It has been found not to be consistent with the Cary Community Plan. Thank you very much. Our next, and I believe final case of the day, is 18 REZ 29. Ms. Deborah Grannon's with us to talk about Carpenter Upchurch Road.
Thank you. Good evening. This is a request to rezone approximately 13.8 acres located at 2832 Carpenter Upchurch Road. It's located south of Morrisville Parkway, located north of the Heritage Pines development. The property has frontage along Morrisville Parkway, which is a major thoroughfare, and along Carpenter Upchurch Road, which is a collector avenue. There is a transit stop along NC 55 Highway. And the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Master Plan identifies a portion of an existing and future street side trail on the north side of Morrisville Parkway. Subject property is located less than a mile from the Cary Tennis Park. According to Cary's most recent GIS maps, the subject property is not impacted by any stream buffers. However, field determination of such features will be required at the time of development plan review. And according to Cary's growth framework map, the subject property is located in a traditional neighborhood, which, as you know, is predominantly single-family detached residential, but also allows discrete pods of other uses, such as residential multifamily townhomes, patio homes, etc. The existing zoning in place has a base zoning district of general commercial conditional use and a small portion of residential multifamily conditional. And the property is also located within a mixed-use overlay district, the Morrisville Parkway Mixed-Use Overlay District, which is the dark blue line. Again, I said base zoning, and that's because back in 2004, there was an activity center concept plan approved for the property. So before we had preliminary development plans, we had mixed-use sketch plans, and before we had mixed-use sketch plans, we had activity center concept plans, which gave us a picture of a future development. At that time, it was pretty intense. It was predominantly general commercial, with some residential multifamily. It identified a good bit of open space because of stream buffers in close proximity to the site. Well, the applicant came to us and said that he had been trying for many, many years to market this property. There were some real challenges with the road network out here at this site. As you may know, there was a really confusing intersection. There were a number of commercial opportunities that never came to fruition. There were never a contract signed. We never saw a development plan come forward for this. So they came in with a rezoning application and asked to remove it from this activity center concept plan. The rest of the activity center concept plan would stay in place. They'd like to propose residential multifamily conditional use. This shows you the area to be removed. And the conditions proposed by the applicant would limit the use to townhomes and neighborhood recreation, a maximum density of 8 dwelling units per acre, a minimum of 5,000 square feet of community gathering space, which is double the requirement per the ordinance. They've offered that the streets would be designed to a public standard and offered for dedication to the public. And since the town council public hearing, the applicant has also offered to increase the buffer and setback along the southern property line. So because this is in a mixed-use overlay district, there is no buffer requirement. They could come forward without providing that, but this was important to the neighbors. So the applicant's proposing a 20-foot buffer along the southern property line adjacent to the large lot, undeveloped parcel. They would have a type A buffer, or highest performing buffer, and then a type B buffer adjacent to the townhome development that's immediately to the south of the property in Heritage Pines. And then they've offered an additional 5-foot setback off the buffer. Staff has conducted a preliminary analysis of the request and find that the applicable portions of the Cary Community Plan include the Live chapter, and that this does provide more housing options. The Work chapter is also applicable in that this provides housing options for the workforce near RTP, more variety with housing choices. Townhomes are a permitted use in traditional neighborhood, and we looked at the transitions, especially because it's in close proximity to a major thoroughfare, a collector avenue, an existing townhome development, and then they've offered a zoning condition that they would provide some buffers, guarantee those buffers, and more open space. We did see that that would be applicable. At the neighborhood meeting in January, there were about 20 attendees, most of which were residents of the Heritage Pines neighborhood. And they voiced general support for this because it was less intense. Residential townhomes, not the commercial high-intensity use that was originally proposed for the site. They had questions about the impacts, mainly the traffic and specifically what was happening with the road improvements in the area. There were no speakers at the town council public hearing and no questions from the council members. We've only had one email from an adjacent resident who just wanted to know if there was a way to preserve the site as open space, permanent open space, or if it had to be developed, could it be something, a specialty retail, like a restaurant, sit-down restaurant that you could walk to. I think everybody would like to be able to walk to a nice sit-down restaurant, but the applicant has said that this is really not going to be suitable for a retail or a commercial use. Wanted to give you a quick update that the progress is moving forward with the new traffic signal at Morrisville Parkway and Carpenter Up Church Road. So everything is moving forward on schedule, and staff is monitoring this closely to ensure that the new traffic signal will be installed soon. So with our preliminary analysis, we have found that this is consistent with the plan. Again, we looked at the appropriateness of the zoning, the moderate amount of townhome housing in a discrete pod. More importantly, I think what we looked at was the shape chapter and the strategic location, that intersection of those two major thoroughfares. And the density, even though it's higher than the case you heard previously, this location seems to be well suited for more intensity because it's on the periphery of a residential neighborhood and along the frontage of these major thoroughfares where there's been much road construction and improvements. So once again, the questions for the board are, is this location appropriate? Is the density appropriate? The transitions? And does this proposal meet the intent of a pod or a discrete neighborhood pocket? So this concludes staff's presentation, and the applicant is present and then will be available after the applicant's comments to answer any of your questions.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the Planning Board. Glenda Top with Glenda S. Top and Associates. I'm here tonight on behalf of the property owners, Dale and Joel Carpenter. Staff pretty much said everything I was going to say. I'll just reiterate a few points. This site does have base zoning, and it's also part of an activity center concept plan that was adopted in 2004. With both plans, there was commercial zoning approved. But as staff pointed out, and on the slide that shows the road construction, unfortunately, there was a change at the intersection of Morrisville Parkway and Carpenter Up Church Road that really affected traffic patterns in this area and made it very difficult for the owners of the property to get any traction for non-residential use. The owners did work with the town. It took a while, but as shown on that slide, the intersection is now being changed. Everyone's excited and waiting for it to be open, which should be very soon. The Cary Community Plan designates this location as a traditional neighborhood. The use is appropriate in that category. Staff went over the policies that we comply with in terms of the live, work, and shape chapter. We did go back and add the southern perimeter buffer adjacent to Heritage Pines, and the town is currently working on public streets within townhomes, so we have offered that condition that we will comply with whatever standard is approved. If there is either way, we've committed to public streets. Really don't want to talk about POD because this is the first time it's really come up on my cases, really. So I think I'm going to just say, if you look at the development patterns in this area and the adopted activity center concept plan along with the base zoning, multifamily is allowed in a portion of this area that we are rezoning. This is not something that, as you can see on the map up there, although this is the proposed plan, there is a portion that we're looking at even that was approved for condominiums or multifamily. There's townhomes across the street. Again, the intent of the owners of the property was to get that commercial, but unfortunately, if you look at the history and what happened, that road configuration really made it very difficult to get anyone interested, and then by the time of today, when it's being fixed, those commercial opportunities went elsewhere. So in terms of what we feel is the best use of the property, given the development patterns in the area, we feel that what we're proposing is appropriate and ask for the board's support. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions of the staff? I'll start to the right this time.
Just one quick question. I'm trying to figure out by looking at the map where they're going to have an entrance or exit. Does that make sense? Onto what roads? I mean, obviously it's going to be Morrisville Parkway, right?
Yeah, we'd look for it to line up across from existing roads. It might be developed in conjunction with the adjacent, neighborhood over here, the adjacent development. So again, these are things we're going to look at the time of development plan review, but typically we look for access points to come into the site to line up, with roads that are directly across the street.
Okay, thank you. I was just curious.
We'll just keep moving from there.
Sure. Good evening. Quick question. So the 2004 concept plan is basically history. Is that correct?
Most of it
Most of it?
is, most of it is history in terms of, when you say history as in done, there's been some development out there, and it would still preserve the opportunity for someone to either develop under the base zoning or use this plan. So the open space shown on here, the open space shown here is because there's a stream buffer adjacent to the property. There's still a commercial pod here. There's the opportunity for residential. This is developed to the north. This is all completed.
That's all developed on that
Yeah.
side. But I just showing on the one of the previous slides, it showed that the property to the east, and what I said, the section that would be history, maybe a wrong use of words, that's now permitted for multifamily. So there is the possibility that entire area could just become multifamily. You have
Yes.
townhomes and
Yes,
it could
that's
potentially be
correct.
multifamily. They could come in and Somebody could propose whatever, but what the kind
This
of,
could be townhomes or multifamily, it could be condominiums or apartments.
okay.
Okay.
I just for clarification, I don't really have any other questions. Thanks.
It's to you, Steve.
Just a quick one. So it's not determined right now if there would be an entrance or an exit on Carpenter up Church Road?
No, not at this time. That's something that we'll have to take a look at the time of the development plan.
Because the house goes out there today, right? I know it would change, but I'm just saying for the
Yeah, these are all things that we'll have to look at, you know, the design, the layout, and close the proximity to the intersection. So all of those factors will come into it and be evaluated at the development plan stage.
okay, that's it.
Anything? Nope.
No?
And none for me. So does anyone have a motion to put forward?
I'll make a motion. Let me make sure I got the right one in front of me. I move that the board find case number 18 REZ 29 is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans for the reasons set forth in the staff report, presentation, and discussion by the Planning and Zoning Board.
Have we a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
No.
No?
No.
Would anyone else have any discussion before I call this? No? Okay, well then, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Say no. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Grannon.
I do have one other thing.
Ah.
I'd just like to take a moment. This is Volunteer Appreciation Month. On behalf of the Planning and Development Services Department, the Legal Department, Transportation Facilities Department, those of us who've worked with you on a regular basis, we'd just like to tell you how much we appreciate all your hard work and time and your questions. Please continue to reach out to us. Jillian White and Julie Clifton, our board clerks, have gotten some tokens of appreciation for you, and they're back in the break room. It's just a small way to let you know that we know this is hard work, and we do appreciate your time and your effort and your thoughtfulness. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for those of you at home, yes, those tokens are edible. Was there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second.
All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
All those
Aye.
opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you. Good evening.
Second really right.
This has been a production of Cary TV. Visit the Town of Cary's website at townofcary.org.